how many countries are there? This isn't a trick question. Depending on who you ask, the number's roughly around 200. Yet, there's good reason to believe that by the dawn of the 22nd century, the world might consist of fewer nations than we have now. And it's all because of the ocean. For decades, sea levels have been steadily rising, and for many low-lying nations, this spells disaster. One day, they may disappear from our maps forever. So which countries risk sinking beneath the waves? From establishing digital sovereignty to preparing full-scale evacuation plans, what strategies are these nations deploying to confront this rising tide? Everyone thinks Atlantis is cool, until Poseidon's wrath arrives at their doorstep. Kiribati is a nation comprising 33 islands scattered across the Pacific Ocean, 20 of which are inhabited. The country spans a vast area of Polynesian waters northwest of Australia. It embodies the typical postcard paradise: hammocks suspended between palm trees, turquoise seas, white sand beaches, stilt houses perched along the shorelines, and an intricate language that contains 12 different words for coconut depending on its ripeness. Above all, Kiribati holds a rich and vibrant culture intricately intertwined with the sea, but it might all disappear rather soon. Although the people of Kiribati have built their entire way of life on a deep connection to the ocean, that very ocean could soon be the cause of their destruction because their nation is slowly sinking. Apart from the volcanic island of Banaba, the entirety of this coastal paradise, composed of coral reefs and atolls, lies about 2 meters or less above sea level. Due to glacial melting occurring elsewhere around the globe, the rising sea level now threatens Kiribati's very existence. Climate experts predict that by 2100, sea level surrounding Kiribati could rise between half a meter and a full meter. While this might not sound substantial, such an increase would wreak havoc on communities living throughout these island chains. In a worst-case scenario, sea levels could surge by 2 meters, completely swallowing the islands. The margin between a harmonious symbiosis with the sea and total disaster here is frighteningly slim. About 100,000 people live in the nation of Kiribati, with over half of them residing in the capital city of Tarawa, a narrow atoll barely rising above sea level. Yet the reality is that their entire way of life is increasingly at risk. Neptune doesn't have to entirely swallow the island for it to become completely uninhabitable. Storm surges invade the land more frequently each year, devastating crops, flooding homes, and contaminating fresh water supplies that are essential to sustaining life. As the water slowly erodes the islands and the infrastructure built upon them, residents have fewer and fewer resources available to address this rapidly worsening problem. If conditions continue at their current pace and predictions prove accurate, Tarawa will become unlivable within a single generation unless innovative technology can dramatically alter this dire trajectory. Experts anticipate that Kiribati will likely become one of the first countries on Earth to be entirely submerged. But honestly, this is nothing new for Kiribati. As far back as 1989, a UN report on the greenhouse effect listed Kiribati among the countries most at risk from rising sea levels. 10 years later, 2 of its uninhabited islands simply disappeared under the waves. Now, another 25 years have passed, and the escalating emergency is compelling Kiribati to take increasingly drastic actions. Local residents build walls out of coral only to see them destroyed by the high tides. Entire towns are gradually shifting a few meters inland, and mangroves are being planted in an effort to protect the eroding soil. But these are minor measures compared to the magnitude of the problem at hand. Bigger thinking is required, and that is precisely what the citizens of Kiribati and their government are now undertaking. One proposed solution was to build an enormous floating platform, somewhat like an oil rig. This would allow the inhabitants to live similarly to how they previously did, on the water, but without the constant threat of erosion destroying their homes. It's an ambitious plan, and in theory, it could work. The main obstacle, however, is that Kiribati simply can't afford it. The platform would cost around $2 billion to build, which is roughly 10 times Kiribati's total GDP. Another solution considered was to terraform the landscape by dredging sand from the ocean and adding it onto the islands, similar to the artificial islands constructed off the coast of Dubai. Yet again, this approach would require billions of dollars, funds that the country simply doesn't have to raise the nation's elevation by the several meters needed as a minimum. Moreover, even this undertaking would only temporarily postpone the inevitable by approximately 100 years. Another solution has been to simply give up. No, we're not kidding here. Former President Ano Dong advocated for an approach he termed migration with dignity, which essentially involves Kiribati and its citizens relocating somewhere else entirely. The Kiribati government has already purchased land in Fiji, initially intended for growing crops, but this land may ultimately serve as a refuge if the worst climate change predictions come true and the nation's evacuation becomes necessary. The World Bank has argued that Australia and New Zealand should permit open migration for people displaced by climate change in the region, though these governments haven't shown much enthusiasm for that. Australia's immigration system is notoriously strict, and New Zealand has only committed to accepting 75 Kiribati citizens per year. But even that isn't much of a solution either. Fiji faces its own climate change challenges. Indeed, every country on Earth does. Moving somewhere else only kicks the problem down the road and arguably erases Kiribati's ancestral lands that inhabitants have lived on for generations, not to mention their unique culture. Perhaps the worst injustice here is that none of this is Kiribati's fault. The country contributes only 0.6 of global greenhouse gas emissions, the same emissions that are causing rising ocean levels. Wealthier, higher polluting nations are essentially sinking them. This explains why Kiribati's government has been so vocal, repeatedly standing on its soapbox to demand global initiatives addressing climate change. Yet as the waters steadily rise, these appeals seem to increasingly fall on deaf ears. For Kiribati, sooner than most, it may become tragically too late to change the outcome. The Maldives represent a particularly unique case when it comes to climate change, rising sea levels and pollution. Most of this island nation sits very close to sea level, making it highly vulnerable to these changes. Additionally, pollution is likely experienced acutely here due to its proximity to India, one of the world's worst polluters. Like Kiribati, the Maldives seem like a picturesque paradise at risk of slipping beneath the waves. But will it? A surprising discovery made in 2010 has challenged the prevailing narrative that the Maldives is inevitably headed underwater due to melting ice caps and greenhouse gas emissions. You see, the Maldives consists of nearly 1,200 individual islands, reefs, atolls, rocks, you name it. If there's something barely above sea level, the Maldives probably has dozens of them. And remarkably, some of these islands are actually growing despite rising sea levels. Scientists discovered this by comparing aerial photographs taken in the mid-20th century with those from the 21st century. While powerful tides erode some islands, they simultaneously deposit sediment onto others. This observation has popularized the concept that islands are not static entities, rather they naturally shift, grow, and evolve in cycles. Although climate change has undeniably caused significant erosion and shrinkage on numerous islands, many have surprisingly maintained a fairly consistent size. These islands have defied the grim predictions of climate doomsayers, even as sea levels rise by an inch or more per decade. The Maldives' secret lies in coral reef ecosystems, which serve as the very foundation of its islands. Built over millennia, these coral reefs offer crucial natural protection that artificial defenses simply can't replicate. However, we hate to burst the bubble on this issue, but rising sea levels are still undeniably impacting the Maldives in a substantial way, though not solely due to encroaching tides. Some experts suggest that up to 80% of Maldivian islands could become uninhabitable by 2050 due to insufficient fresh water supplies. Currently, 77% of Maldivian citizens already rely heavily on rainwater for drinking, a resource which will only grow increasingly erratic as climate change intensifies. So, remember how we said that coral reefs are the backbone of Maldivian civilization? Well, currently, 70% of coral reefs in the Maldives are experiencing mass bleaching events. When coral reefs bleach and eventually die, they become brittle and they lose their capacity to provide structural support for islands, support that previously enabled islands to maintain their size or even grow. 14 of the Maldives islands have already had to be abandoned due to devastating coastal erosion events, and with over 500,000 people living across these islands, that's a significant problem. Meanwhile, in a bizarre twist, the man-made defenses being constructed to combat erosion can often prevent islands from naturally shifting and adapting to tidal changes, ultimately making the situation worse in the long run. Structures like seawalls can disrupt the natural cycle in which sediment is washed onto reefs, gradually building up the islands. It'd be unrealistic to suggest that rising sea levels will not impact the Maldives at all. However, the islands might prove more adaptable than initially expected, provided the nation can effectively harness its natural defenses, which unfortunately are now rapidly deteriorating. Indeed, as we mentioned regarding the recent report using aerial photographs, some islands have expanded while others have maintained their original size. Yet it's important to note that 40% of the islands have experienced an overall loss of land, posing significant risks to the population in the coming decades. Although these islands may not all be actively sinking, they are undeniably declining. As a precaution, the government in Mali has begun building artificial islands and even considering purchasing land from other countries as insurance. This clearly indicates that they are genuinely concerned about the intermittent threat of losing at least some part of their territory. Ultimately, many scientists still predict that the entire nation could be completely submerged by 2100. Tuvalu is another Polynesian nation, scarcely above sea level, and it's increasingly threatened as ocean levels continue to rise. It sits just slightly further south than some of Kiribati's islands, and if you travel further still, you'll eventually arrive in Fiji. Much like the other nations mentioned today, Tuvalu is not just one single island, it's a collection of 9 of them. It sounds like a lovely place for a holiday cruise, but unless more is done to address rising sea levels, the only way you'll be able to visit Tuvalu is by sailing over the waters where it once stood. You see, sea levels in Tuvalu are actually rising faster than in other parts of the world. The global average indicates that sea levels are increasing by a little over 3 millimeters each year, but this change is not uniform everywhere. Over the last 30 years, the global average rise has been just under 10 centimeters, while in Tuvalu it's been around 15. This means that the sea surrounding Tuvalu, especially around the island of Nanumea, is rising 1.5 times faster than elsewhere, which is not good. And it's only going to get worse as the global average rate of sea level rise is expected to more than double by 2100. By 2050, many parts of Tuvalu will be submerged beneath the average high tide mark, including areas with critical infrastructure. Increasing coastal flooding and intensifying storm damage are compounding existing issues, which others in this video are already experiencing, such as crop damage, reduced access to fresh water, and even land subsidence. That's right, sea levels are not only rising, Tuvalu is also sinking. So, what is the Tuvaluan government going to do about it? Well, actually, they're doing quite a bit, given their situation is considered a bit of an emergency. It has even prompted NASA to become involved by supporting what's known as the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project. This initiative involves extensive scientific research around Tuvalu's islands, including analysis of satellite imagery to determine the best possible measures for combating rising tides. Another pioneering project by Tuvalu employs one of the most unique and novel concepts of statehood that the world has ever encountered, moving the country into the digital realm. We're not simply talking about connected to the internet. After all, it's 2025. They've already got internet access. Instead, we're referring to the government's creation of a complete digital replica of Tuvalu, backing up everything from buildings and trees to its very beaches. Through this ambitious initiative, the hope is that such a digital twin will safeguard Tuvalu's natural beauty, culture, and the rights of its 11,000 citizens for generations to come. Whilst the project has faced some skepticism, it's far from just a gimmick. Sovereignty in the modern age typically refers to the recognition of a certain people inhabiting a certain territory. However, Tuvalu poses a fair and pressing question. How do you maintain sovereignty when your country might one day disappear and its people have to relocate? The Digital Tuvalu project seeks to provide an answer. By establishing a digital presence, the Tuvalu government aims to issue digital passports backed by blockchain technology, thereby enabling essential government services to continue functioning remotely. These services encompass everything from holding elections to registering births, deaths, and marriages, among many others. Ultimately, the Tuvaluans refuse to accept erasure simply because the islands they inhabit might one day be underwater. By championing ideas such as this, Tuvalu may one day help to redefine what sovereignty truly means in the modern world. And who knows, perhaps a skilled enough hacker might even launch the world's first cyber coup, which could be interesting. We've all got that to look forward to. Next up is Vanuatu. You probably get the picture by now. It's a South Pacific archipelago which is severely threatened by sea levels continuing to rise. Home to 300,000 residents spread across 83 islands, the country already faces multiple harsh realities of climate change firsthand. Situated west of Fiji and north of the French colony of New Caledonia, Vanuatu finds itself clearly in the climate change oh shit zone. Back in 2022, the Vanuatu government began drafting plans to relocate dozens of villages within 2 years as rising tides started to erode their existing lands. Yet this is hardly the first time the country has confronted an internal migration crisis of this scale. Vanuatu was among the first nations to relocate an entire community due to climate hazards. In 2005, residents on Tugua and Northern Islands were moved from a flood-prone coastal area to higher ground. More recently, in 2017, all 11,000 inhabitants of Ambe, another northern island, were transported by an armada of small boats to neighboring islands following the eruption of the Manaro Voi volcano. Former climate change minister Ralph Regan-Vanu said that in his country, displacement due to climate-related events has now become the norm. Regan-Vanu stated, "Climate displacement of populations is the main feature of our future. We have to be ready for it and plan for it now. It's going to be an immense challenge and a profound tragedy for many people who will have to leave their ancestral lands and move elsewhere, but that is the reality we face." Regan-Vanu is highly vocal about his country's plight resulting from climate change, which is ultimately caused by other nations. Climate change has contributed to Vanuatu experiencing a sequence of natural disasters that have not only disrupted life for numerous communities, but have also left the country trapped in a constant cycle of rebuilding, only to be hit again by the next disaster. Half of Vanuatu's population was affected when Cyclone Pam battered the capital, Port Vila, in 2015, killing a dozen people, destroying crops and leaving thousands homeless. From flooding and tsunamis to the threats of storm surges and earthquakes, it feels as if Vanuatu is battling against Mother Nature herself. On top of all of this, rising sea levels are creating one catastrophe after another. Makeshift dams can't prevent small villages from being completely flooded during the rainy season, and the planetary changes caused by greenhouse gas emissions have contributed to Pacific storms becoming more intense and unpredictable. As a result, the extended droughts have made staple crops harder to grow, causing food prices to rise. Meanwhile, declining incomes drive migration away from lands that had supported families for generations. Consequently, the country is suffering seriously economically due to climate change. Vanuatu has decided to take action and hold those responsible for these changes accountable. They spent years considering whether to launch an international lawsuit against wealthier polluter nations for the rapid loss of their land. Discussions about these lawsuits have intensified amid growing tensions between smaller, poorer nations affected most acutely by the climate crisis and larger, wealthier nations more capable of absorbing the cost. At the COP29 summit in late November 2024, tensions reached such a pitch that a group of smaller nations almost abandoned negotiations over climate funding. Ultimately, the deal was saved at the 11th hour, with wealthier countries committing to raise climate-related financial aid for developing nations to $300 billion by 2035. Vanuatu played an active role in these negotiations. Legal proceedings are currently underway. In late 2024, the International Court of Justice in The Hague heard opinions from various countries concerning Vanuatu's situation. A judgment is anticipated later this year. Recognition of the climate-related issues faced by smaller nations, driven by larger polluting countries, could potentially pave the way for major global lawsuits between nations. However, this recognition may offer cold comfort for Vanuatu, which continues to experience worsening disasters and steadily sinks into the sea until more concrete action is taken. The Solomon Islands is the final nation that we're featuring in today's video, and it's predicted to experience even more severe consequences from climate change and rising sea levels. Located within the regional context of the other countries that we've discussed, the Solomon Islands exemplifies the situations previously described, but intensified significantly. Sea levels around the Solomon Islands are rising at a rate of at least 7 millimeters per year, which is more than double the global average. Some measurements even place the rate closer to 10 millimeters per year, over triple the global figure. This accelerated rise is due to a range of factors, of which climate change is a particularly concerning contributor. Another significant factor is increased wave energy, making erosion more prominent as a natural increase in local wind intensity has accelerated the process. Additionally, the Solomon Islands lie in a highly active tectonic region. As surrounding plates shift, the risk that the islands may sink further into the sea becomes greater. The reality is that despite being an archipelago composed of almost 1,000 islands, the nation is losing land at an alarming pace. A study tracking just 33 reef islands of the country between 1947 and 2014 found that 5 had been completely washed away. Thankfully, these islands were uninhabited. However, another 6 islands, which were inhabited, have lost around 20% of their surface area. Thus, a full third of their reef islands have been severely affected within the span of less than 3 generations, with half of those heavily impacted islands just being completely gone. Considering that sea level rise in the region is predicted to accelerate significantly during the latter half of the 21st century, the critical question is this: where will the remaining islands be in 3 more generations? Whether due to climate change or not, the Solomon Islands are gradually sinking, and this is having significant consequences on their landscape. Biodiversity and ecosystems are being devastated, and coastal farmland is being severely damaged by seawater intrusion, affecting the livelihoods of entire communities. According to the World Bank in 2023, cyclones, flash floods, and other weather-related disasters have already forced approximately 26,000 people within the Solomon Islands, that's around 3% of its 800,000-strong population, to relocate since 2008. The country is implementing a wide array of strategies to cope with these challenges, including mangrove planting, planning internal migration, cultivating salt and drought-resistant crops, introducing soil improvement programs, and rainwater harvesting, among others. However, whether these measures will ultimately prove sufficient simply remains unknown. Now, it's important that we pay attention to the Solomon Islands because by the latter half of the 21st century, sea level rises across the entire Pacific are expected to be similar to what the Solomons are experiencing right now. The countries mentioned in today's video, along with many others, will face the same or even greater challenges. In this way, the Solomon Islands serve as a cautionary tale, a grim glimpse into our future if we, as a planet and a species, fail to change our ways. Solutions must include wealthy, large-scale polluters accepting accountability, swallowing their pride, and committing to help less developed countries create a more sustainable future. Kiribati's current president, Taniti Mamu, perhaps put it best when he said, "I hope they listen now, because they have to honor their commitments and pledges. They need to open their ears more clearly and their minds. The wealthy countries are, after all, responsible for what we are now facing." It may be a harsh reality that some nations do not wish to hear, but the countries featured in this video are facing an even harsher one, the very question of whether they will soon exist at all. Thank you for watching.